The grand chamber of the Valeri hegemony did not encourage comfort. It was designed to enforce humility. The ceiling vanished into a holographic projection of the galactic core, a swirling maelstrom of violent light and devouring gravity that served as a constant reminder to the gathered delegates that their empires, no matter how vast, were merely dust motes caught in a cosmic storm. Beneath this simulated apocalypse, the High Synod gathered in a silence so profound it felt heavy, a physical weight pressing against the chitinous armor and silken robes of the assembled species. They were the architects of the known galaxy, the elder races who had mapped the hyperlanes and tamed the solar winds. Yet today, the air reeked of a primal, unrefined emotion that most of them claimed to have evolved beyond: fear. High Archon Thalcora, the presiding voice of the Synod, allowed his manipulator limbs to rest upon the obsidian dais, his many-faceted eyes reflecting the nervous shifting of the ambassadors before him. He did not speak immediately. He let the silence stretch, tightening the tension like a coil, forcing them to dwell on the image that hovered in the center of the room, a three-dimensional render of an object found drifting in the dead space between the spiral arms. It was not a rock. It was not a comet. It was a construct of jagged, brutal metal, scarred by eons of cosmic radiation, vast beyond the scale of standard dreadnoughts, and radiating a silence that was somehow louder than the screaming nebula in which it had been found. "The report is verified," Thalcora said, his voice a subsonic rumble that vibrated in the chest cavities of every being present. "The object is of Terran origin. The carbon dating, the metallurgical signature, the archaic linguistic markings on the hull, all confirm it. It is human." A murmur rippled through the chamber, a dissonant chorus of chirps, growls, and telepathic hisses. The humans. The youngest of the spacefaring races, the children who had stumbled out of their gravity well with fission drives and desperate ambition only a few galactic cycles ago. They were viewed as chaotic, fractured, and technologically crude, a species that solved problems with kinetic force rather than elegant energy manipulation. And yet, the object floating in the projection defied this categorization. It was ancient, seemingly older than the human expansion itself, a paradox that made the Synod uncomfortable. It looked like a weapon, a spear of void black alloy aimed at the heart of creation, pulsing with an energy signature that the hegemony's sensors could barely quantify. Ambassador Xylos of the psionic conclave floated forward, his ethereal form shimmering with agitation. "Impossible," he projected, his thought voice echoing in the minds of the assembly. "The humans are barely past the age of combustion. To build a vessel of this magnitude, it would require resources of an entire system and engineering principles they have not yet discovered. Look at the energy readings, Archon. The core of that vessel is not a reactor. It is a caged singularity. A tier in spacetime held open by magnetic fields of impossible density. If the humans built this, then everything we know of them is a lie. They are not the scavengers we assumed. They are the slumbering giants we feared in our oldest myths." The accusation hung in the air, turning the confusion into paranoia. If humanity possessed the capacity to shackle black holes and forge hulls that could withstand the crushing pressure of the deep void for centuries, then their diplomatic humility, their clumsy trade agreements, and their seemingly primitive fleets were a facade. A mask worn by a predator waiting for the prey to lower its guard. Thalcora gestured to the scanned data, scrolling rapidly alongside the image of the ship. "It is dormant," the Archon continued, trying to maintain the veneer of authority. "Our probes detected no life signs, no biological rhythmic output, no active AI subroutines. It is a ghost drifting on the tides of the dark sector. But the energy output remains constant. It is not decaying, it is waiting. The question before this Synod is not merely of origin, but of action. The Terran government has been notified of our discovery, as per the interstellar concordat. They have dispatched a delegation to the coordinates. They claim ownership." The chamber erupted. This time there was no murmuring, there was outrage. The notion that the humans would be allowed to reclaim a weapon of such apocalyptic potential was anathema to the elder races. The Valeri, the psionic conclave, the mechanically augmented cybersynod, all of them saw the ghost ship not as property, but as a threat that needed to be dissected or vaporized. "They cannot be allowed to board it," shouted General Raknosh of the warrior caste, slamming a fist onto his console. "If that vessel wakes, if it is indeed a weapon, the humans lack the discipline to control it. Hey are emotional, volatile creatures. Give a child a supernova and they will burn the galaxy just to see the light. We must seize it. We must dismantle it and purge its secrets before the Terrans arrive. This is a matter of galactic security. The hegemony has the right of salvage over any derelict found in unaligned space. This is law. The debate that followed was a chaotic storm of legalism and panic. Some argued for immediate destruction, fearing what slept inside the hull. Others, driven by greed, wanted to strip the technology to bolster their own fleets. But beneath the shouting, the image of the ship rotated slowly, indifferent to their fear. The markings on its hull were visible now, magnified by the sensors. They were stark white letters, angular and unadorned, spelling out a name that meant nothing to the aliens but resonated with a haunting finality: UNS Penitence. The debate was cut short not by a gavel, but by a sensor alert that screamed across the emergency channels. The chamber's holographic ceiling shifted, zooming out from the ghost ship to the space surrounding it. Space was folding. It was not the elegant, smooth transition of a warp drive, nor the tearing rupture of a jump gate. It was a distortion, a bruising of reality, as if a massive hand were pushing through a curtain of heavy velvet. Gravity sensors spiked, warnings flashed red, and the gathered delegates fell silent, watching as the human delegation arrived. It was not a fleet. It was not a squadron of heavy cruisers bristling with railguns and missile pods. It was a single vessel. It was sleek, shaped like a teardrop of silver and chrome, devoid of the aggressive weapon ports that usually characterized human design. It moved with a fluid grace, sliding out of the distortion field and coming to a halt alongside the massive, jagged bulk of the Penitence. The contrast was jarring, the pristine, small diplomatic ship against the ancient, scarred Leviathan. "They are hailing us," the communications officer announced, his voice trembling slightly. "Audio only, wideband transmission on all diplomatic frequencies." Thalcora signaled for the channel to be opened. He expected the bluster of a human admiral, the defensive posturing of a species caught with a secret weapon. He expected threats or desperate lies. Instead, the voice that filled the grand chamber was calm, resonant, and undeniably weary. It sounded like the voice of a man who had seen stars die and had grown tired of the light. "This is High Admiral Vance of the Terran Systems Alliance," the voice said. There was no static, no interference. The signal clarity was absolute. "We have received your coordinates. We acknowledge the discovery of the Penitence. We request that all hegemony vessels withdraw to a safe distance of 1 light second immediately. This is not a request born of secrecy, but of safety. You are standing on the edge of a grave, and the ground is unstable. Please, for your own sake, back away." The arrogance of the demand stunned the Synod. To order the elder races to retreat, to treat the hegemony fleets like curious children wandering into a construction zone, General Rachnosh growled low in his throat, his mandibles clicking. "They dare command us in open space." Thalcora activated his own microphone, his voice projecting outward to the human ship. "Admiral Vance, this is High Archon Thalcora. You are in the presence of the Hegemony High Council. This vessel, the Penitence, was found in neutral space. By the laws of salvage, it is under our jurisdiction until its nature is determined. We will not withdraw. We require an explanation. What is this vessel? Why does it possess an energy signature capable of destabilizing a solar system? If you do not answer, we will consider it a hostile asset and act accordingly." There was a long pause on the other end. When Vance spoke again, the weariness had deepened, but the steel beneath it was unmistakable. "It is not a hostile asset, Archon, and it is not a weapon. It is a memory, and it is not under your jurisdiction because it never left ours. That ship has been on a long patrol. We simply lost the leash for a moment. If you attempt to seize it, if you attempt to breach its hull with your scanning beams or your salvage drones, you will trigger the containment protocols. And I promise you, your fleets are not equipped to survive what comes out. We are coming aboard to secure it. We invite a small delegation to accompany us to verify our claims, but bring no weapons. The Penitence reacts poorly to aggression." The offer was a trap or a test. The Synod debated furiously in hushed tones, but curiosity and the desire to uncover the human secret outweighed the fear. A shuttle was prepared. Thalcora himself would go, accompanied by General Rachnosh and Ambassador Xylos. They would descend into the belly of the beast and see for themselves what the humans were hiding. As their shuttle departed the station and cross, the void toward the 2 human ships, the scale of the Penitence became terrifyingly apparent. It was a mountain of metal, miles long, its surface pitted by impacts that would have shattered a moon. And yet there were no windows, no lights, just the cold, dead hull and the overwhelming sense of dread that radiated from it like heat from a fire. The silver diplomatic ship docked with the ancient vessel, extending a boarding tube. The alien shuttle followed, latching onto a secondary airlock. When the airlock cycled open, the atmosphere that hit them was frigid, smelling of recycled air that had been scrubbed a million times over, tasting of ozone and dust. The gravity was heavy, slightly higher than standard, pressing down on them. Standing in the receiving bay was Admiral Vance. He was a human of advanced years, his hair white, his face lined with the deep grooves of stress and command. He wore a dress uniform of charcoal gray, unadorned by the usual rows of medals. Beside him stood 2 guards, but they held no rifles, only strange, heavy staves tipped with glowing blue circuitry. They stood like statues, their faces obscured by helmets that showed no eyes, only a smooth, reflective visor. "Welcome to the penitents," Vance said, his voice echoing in the cavernous bay. The walls were lined with conduit and piping, industrial and raw. There was no art, no comfort. "I apologize for the chill. The life support is running on minimal power to divert everything to the core." "The core?" Xylos asked, his mind reaching out to scan the ship and finding a wall of psychic static so dense it made him wince. "You speak of the singularity we detected. Why would a ship need a trapped black hole? The energy output exceeds any engine requirement. This is a fortress, Admiral. Who are you planning to fight with this?" Vance turned and began to walk deeper into the ship, gesturing for them to follow. The corridors were vast, wide enough for tanks to drive abreast, yet they were empty. "We didn't build this to fight anyone, Ambassador. That is the mistake your people always make about us. You see our rapid expansion, our kinetic weapons, our stubborn refusal to die, and you assume we are conquerors. You assume we want to rule the galaxy." He stopped at a massive blast door, typing a complex code into a hardwired keypad. The gears of the door groaned, the sound of metal protesting against centuries of stillness. "We don't want to rule, we just want to survive. And sometimes survival requires us to do things that morality forbids." The doors parted, revealing a tram system. They boarded a small pod which accelerated rapidly, diving deep into the bowels of the ship. As they descended, General Rachnosh noticed the markings on the walls. They were not technical warnings. They were names, thousands of them, etched into the metal plates. "What are these?" the general asked, tracing a claw over a list of names. "The crew," Vance said softly. "The original crew, and the colonists, and the soldiers. This ship wasn't just a vessel, it was a lifeboat. During the unification wars, before we met the hegemony, humanity almost destroyed itself. We created weapons of biological and radiological horror. We tore our own atmosphere apart. This ship was the solution for the things we couldn't kill." The tram slowed and halted. They stepped out onto a catwalk that suspended over an abyss. Below them, miles down, was the core. It was a sphere of containment fields, glowing with a blinding violet light, struggling to hold back a sphere of absolute darkness in the center. The sound was deafening here, a throbbing, rhythmic pulse that felt like the heartbeat of a dying god. The alien delegates stared in horror. The energy readings on their portable scanners were maxing out. The power contained here was enough to crack a planet in half. "It is a weapon," Thalcora whispered, feeling the dread coil around his hearts. "You trapped a black hole to use as a bomb." "No," Vance said, leaning against the railing, looking down into the violet fire. "It's not a black hole. It's a dimensional breach, a wound in the universe. We didn't make it. We found it on the edge of the Sol system. Something was trying to come through, something from outside the galaxy, outside our reality. It was hungry. It fed on psionic energy, on consciousness. When it first touched our minds, millions went mad. We realized we couldn't fight it with guns. We couldn't blow it up. Energy just made it stronger." The Admiral turned to face them, and for the first time the aliens saw the true weight of the human burden. "So we built the penitents. We built a cage. We used our own volatility, our own chaotic psychic potential, the very thing you fear in us, to weave a net. This ship is a psychic amplifier. Those guards, they aren't soldiers. They are nulls. Humans born without a soul, artificially hollowed out to serve as anchors for the field. And the energy sue. RCE, it's not a reactor. It's the friction of that thing trying to claw its way into our universe, grinding against the walls of this ship." The silence that followed was absolute. The alien delegates looked at the human with new eyes. They had viewed humanity as children playing with matches. Now they realized humanity was the only thing standing between the house and the arsonist. They were the wardens of a cosmic prison. "But why is it here?" Xylos asked, his telepathic voice trembling. "Why in the dark sector?" "Because the lock is breaking," Vance said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The penitence has held for 300 years, but the entity is learning, it's adapting. The ship drifted because the navigation systems were compromised by the entity's influence. It wanted to be found. It wanted you to find it. It feeds on fear, on arrogance, on the complex minds of elder races. It lured you here. As if on cue, the violet light in the pit flared white. The ship shuddered violently. Alarms began to scream, a harsh, mechanical wail that tore at the nerves. The null guards stepped forward, raising their staves, bracing themselves as invisible waves of force slammed into them. "It knows you are here," Vance shouted over the cacophony. "Your fear, it tastes it. You have to calm your minds, block your thoughts." But it was too late. General Rachnosh, bred for war, reacted with aggression. He drew his plasma pistol, aiming at the swirling shadows rising from the pit. "I will not be consumed by a ghost," he roared and fired. The bolt of plasma struck the containment field. It was a pinprick, meaningless against the scale of the energy, but it was the catalyst the entity needed. The field flickered. A tendril of shadow, darker than the void, lashed out. It did not burn, it erased. It passed through the catwalk, missing the general by inches, and where it touched the metal simply ceased to exist. "Containment breach," the ship's AI screamed, a synthesized voice devoid of panic but terrifying in its finality. "Reality anchor failing. Breach imminent in T-10 seconds." "We have to initiate the unleashing," Vance said, his face pale. He looked at Thalcora. "There is no other way. We have to purge the sector." "Purge," Thalcora gasped. "You mean destroy the ship?" "No," Vance said, tapping a sequence into his wrist computer. "I mean we have to let the ship do what it was designed to do in an emergency. We have to weaponize the breach." The human admiral slammed his hand onto a red panel on the wall. The penitents groaned, a sound like a planet cracking. The gravity in the chamber shifted, throwing the aliens to the floor. The null guards dropped their staves and fell to their knees, their bodies seizing as the ship drew upon their neural energy. "Watch," Vance commanded, pointing at the holographic display that had sprung up. Outside, in the void, the jagged hull of the penitents began to open. Like a blooming flower of death, the armor plates shifted, revealing the core to the naked vacuum. But instead of an explosion, there was an implosion. The ship didn't fire a beam. It inhaled. The massive energy signature that had terrified the hegemony suddenly inverted. The surrounding space, the dust, the radiation, the light from the distant stars, was sucked toward the ship. "It's a singularity vent," Vance explained, his voice straining against the gravitational distortion. "We are channeling the entity's hunger. We are feeding it the vacuum energy of this entire sector to overfeed it, to force it into a dormant state." The visual was apocalyptic. The penitents became a hole in the universe. The nebula surrounding them began to swirl, drawn into the maw of the human ship. The hegemony fleet, watching from a light second away, registered a gravitational shear that threatened to tear their ships apart. They fired their engines to full reverse, fleeing the terror that the humans had unleashed. Inside the ship, the sensation was indescribable. It felt as though their very souls were being pulled toward the pit. Xylos screamed, clutching his head as the psychic pressure mounted. The entity shrieked, a sound not heard with ears but felt in the marrow of the bone, a cry of frustration and rage as it was force-fed the raw energy of the cosmos, drowning it, suffocating it. And then silence. The violet light died, the shaking stopped, the gravity normalized, the penitents drifted once more, dark and cold. The breach was sealed. The entity was asleep, gorged on the energy of a nebula. Vance slumped against the railing, wiping blood from his nose. The null guards were unconscious, perhaps dead, their sacrifice silent. The human admiral looked at the terrified alien delegates. "It is done. The lock is reset. It will hold for another century, perhaps two." Thalcora slowly picked himself up. He looked at the human with a mixture of horror and awe. You live with this?" he asked. "You keep this, monster. In your basement. You drift through the galaxy carrying a prisoner that could devour us all." "We don't just carry it," Vance said, his voice hollow. "We are the only ones who can, your minds. Your psionic potential is too bright. You shine too loud in the dark. If you had tried to contain this, it would have eaten you alive. But us, humans," he laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "We are a mess. Our minds are chaotic, conflicted, full of noise and static. We taste like ash to it. We are the only species stubborn enough and broken enough to sit in the dark and hold the door shut." The journey back to the airlock was silent. The arrogance of the hegemony was gone, replaced by a chilling realization of the true hierarchy of the galaxy. They had thought themselves the masters, the elder races, the wise guardians. But they were merely the civilians living in the sunlit world, while humanity walked the sewers, fighting the rats that threatened to gnaw through the foundation. Back in the grand chamber of the Synod, the atmosphere had changed. The report from Thalcora was delivered in somber tones. There was no more talk of salvage, no more talk of war with the Terrans. The image of the penitents, drifting once again into the dark, remained on the screen. "We underestimated them," Thalcora addressed the assembly. "We thought their silence was ignorance. We thought their primitive technology was a sign of inferiority. We were wrong. Their technology is not primitive, it is specialized. They have built their entire civilization not on expansion, but on containment. They are not conquerors, they are jailers." A hologram of Admiral Vance appeared in the center of the room. He looked rested, though his eyes still held the shadow of the void. "The penitence is returning to Terran space," he announced. "We will add more layers to the cage, but High Synod, be warned. The entity is not the only one. The signal it sent before we silenced it. It was answered. There are things moving in the dark space between the galaxies, shadows that are waking up." The chamber went deadly still. "We cannot fight them alone," Vance continued. "We have the will and we have the resilience, but we lack the resources. We lack the scale. The hegemony has the fleets, the industry, the energy. We need you, not as masters, not as rivals, but as partners. We will hold the shield, but you must forge the sword." It was a shift in the galactic paradigm. The humans, once dismissed, were now the linchpin of survival. The ultimate weapon the aliens had feared was not a gun to be used against them, but the human spirit itself, unrelenting, self-sacrificial, and capable of enduring horrors that would break the minds of the elder races. Thalcora looked at the faces of the Synod. He saw fear, yes, but he also saw resolve. The petty squabbles over trade routes and border disputes seemed insignificant now. The universe had just gotten much larger and much darker. "We accept," Thalcora said, his voice ringing with a new gravity. "The hegemony stands with Terra. We will send our engineers to assist with the containment. We will share our energy matrices. We will not let the door fail." Vance nodded, a faint, tired smile touching his lips. "Good, because it's going to get cold out here. Vance out." The transmission ended. The penitence fired its thrusters, massive chemical rockets that burned with a dirty, defiant fire, and began the long push back to the solace of the human systems. The alien fleet parted to let it pass, dipping their prows in a gesture of respect that had not been seen in 10,000 years. As the human ghost ship faded into the sensor shadows, Thalcora looked up at the simulation of the galaxy. It no longer looked like a map of conquest. It looked like a fortress under siege. And for the first time, he was glad the humans were the ones guarding the gate. The monsters in the dark had found the one species crazy enough to bite back. The galaxy continued to spin, indifferent to the drama of biological life, but in the halls of the hegemony, the silence was no longer one of fear. It was the silence of preparation. The humans had revealed their ghost, their unleashed power, and in doing so, they had woken the galaxy from its dream of safety. The war was coming, but now, at least, they knew who would lead the charge. The ghost warship was not a relic of the past. It was a harbinger of the future. And humanity, the scarred, stubborn, terrifyingly resilient humanity, was the weapon the universe had been waiting for.